Well, everyone, let's go ahead and talk about the first iPad and see how it holds up in 2021. It's kind of funny because I have so many different tablets and stuff to review, and it always shocks me when I look at the first, tablet or the first phone of the genre, and then I look at the latest one, and you see the changes, you see everything that's happened in between, but it's more remarkable to see the things that are still the same. I look at, the first iPhone, and even up until about like the iPhone's SE2, like there's still a lot of similarities. Obviously, the SE2 is a much better phone, but there's still a lot of similarities. The home buttons, the display, not really, but like the way it looks. And it's really hard to go beyond, what Apple. And when Apple makes a first product, or any manufacturer really, they make a first product that's so great and it looks so good and timeless, it's really interesting to see how they market the next product, to make it that much better. And with the first iPad, obviously, I don't think anybody's planning on using this thing anymore. It's pretty outdated. The hardware is pretty outdated as well. But when you feel this thing in the hand, this thing arguably feels more premium than a lot of iPads, than a lot of phones, than a lot of laptops that I've been using. This thing kind of feels like a MacBook, to be honest. Like the new, like M1, like the cream of the crop. This thing feels like that. And when I hold this thing, when I flip through it, when I go through the software, I pretty much have like an expected experience from it because I know what to expect from this type of device because I've owned it for a couple of years. But that hardware, the way it feels in the hand, still shocks me to this day. And it's still one of the best reasons why I love the iPad for sure. Now, I won't leave an iPad 1 link down below, but whatever other iPads or tablets that I recommend this year, I'll leave them linked down. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, the front of the iPad 1 surprisingly had that 9.7-inch panel that was pretty much recycled over and over and over again to a lot of other iPads. I think up until the iPad 7th generation, they were still making a 9.7-inch iPad. Obviously, high resolution displays and everything, but this is actually a really good, form factor that they had. They shrunk down a lot of the bezel, much needed bezel that they didn't need, and I'm actually glad they did that, obviously, because when you look at the iPad Pros, no bezel on it, they look great, and I love that. But when I look at this device, Apple did a really good job just kind of making it seem like it was something other than a bigger iPhone, which that was kind of the, stereotype that was going on. It was just a bigger iPhone, and I can't blame people for thinking that because the software was pretty much the same way until Apple, refined it a little bit more. And I think the biggest differentiating factor and the biggest push Apple did was the software. That was really the biggest differentiating factor between the, iPhone and the iPad. Now, you do have that old 30-pin connector on the bottom of this device as well, so nothing really has changed there. And you do have that aluminum back on this iPad as well. And as stated before, this is an amazing feeling iPad. There's no camera on it. There's no micro SD card slot. There's nothing crazy like that. But it doesn't need it. It doesn't. It would have been great if it had a camera or something. But at that time, this thing 11 years ago, 2010, this thing came out. This is some really, really strong hardware that Apple released. And like I said before, when you feel this thing in the hand, when you, sift through your fingers and you go through all of it, this is a premium feeling iPad that still feels like the day it came out. It's so crazy to me that this thing still feels this premium. And it's still its strongest asset. Now, I don't know how much these iPads are going for in the used market because I haven't checked. I think I bought mine for like $70, but I would probably recommend everyone to go and buy an iPad 1 as a collector's item. Like I said before, a lot of these iPads, a lot of these phones that are, were once upon a time the greatest thing, they are going up in value like crazy. I don't know what the iPad 1s are at right now, but based on a lot of other iPhones, some of them are going up. And if you want to, I would recommend probably buying them, to be completely honest. Now, everything else about this iPad, there was no camera, so there's no point in talking about it. The software, this thing originally started off with iOS 4. It eventually got up to iOS 5.1.1, which I thought it got way further than that, but only got like one or two versions of software. Essentially, Apple did change that up. This thing did have the Apple A4 chip inside of it. And in 2010, I think maybe we were at the A5 or A6 chip, because in 2013 we had the A7. So it must have been that in 2010 we probably had the A5. So it maybe had like a year-old chip at that time or something like that. But still, not that bad of a chipset for that time. Essentially, it only got like one or two versions of software, and then Apple changed up their software release cycle. So it would have been cool had this thing gotten a couple more versions. But I think there was some sort of software that actually allowed you to kind of boot up a different version of software on your iPad, So I haven't looked into it, but I'll look into it a little bit more. But I'll definitely say the software of the first iPad is something that still shocks me because it's still pretty similar to what we have nowadays. When you look at this, software on here and you look at iOS 14, really the biggest differentiating factor in terms of the format are the widgets. Other than that, it's kind of like the same thing that we have going on, for better or for worse. So I think also that is a pretty big thing as well. it's kind of funny when you think about it, but it's something that's so weird that, things change, but sometimes things don't change that much, which is crazy. Now, this thing also had a massive 6,600 milliamp-hour battery, and that in and of itself is another really, really big asset for this type of device. As I stated before, when you have a phone, when you have an iPad that has this type of battery, I mean, you can literally set this battery, this iPad, like away for a month, come back to it, and it'll still only have drained like a couple of percentage points. And I'll be honest, there's not a lot of devices out there anymore that are in that same category. I look at, the newer iPads that just came out, the iPad Pros. I think for sure at the end of the day, it's a good iPad. I mean, it's a great iPad. It's a great tablet. It's a great, media machine, whatever you want to call it. But sometimes the battery does degrade a little bit more than I would like. And that kind of does seem to be a problem sometimes. But I think other than that, this iPad still has a ton of capability when it comes down to it. And it for sure gets a lot of, praise from me in terms of the battery standpoint and also in the software standpoint. I think this is probably one of the stronger assets just because it still seems and performs kind of okay, which I'm totally okay with, to be completely honest. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now, ending off with the performance, I can definitely tell you this is not a good performing iPad anymore. A lot of apps don't work. Obviously, a lot of software doesn't work. A lot of, YouTube videos you want to watch, a lot of stuff does not work on this iPad, but it still turns on. It still kind of, is kind of smooth a little bit here and there. And I think more than anything, it's just a shock to me that this thing still has some capability for a over 10-year-old, almost 11-year-old device. Now, this thing had that Apple A4 chip, like I said, inside of it, and it had a quarter of a gig of RAM. It had 256 megabytes of RAM. Now, what does that mean? Pretty much it means that this device is not a good performing device anymore. And I think that's probably the number one thing to keep in mind. I mean, I would not recommend anybody using this iPad as a main machine. And I really don't think anybody's using it as a main machine. I think most people are watching this video just to kind of get an idea of like what is still going on with this specific iPad. And I think when it comes down to this iPad, the fact that it still turns on, the fact that it still has somewhat of a decent performance in it for as old as it is, I think it's pretty surprising. But I am also kind of shocked because I think the iPhone 4 came out the same year as this iPad, or the iPhone 4 came out the same year as this iPad. I feel like that iPhone actually has more capability than this specific iPad, so that may be another thing to keep in mind. It's definitely not an insane thing, but it's kind of interesting. I'm kind of shocked, because I was expecting probably more from this type of device, but as I stated before, this is not an iPhone, this is an iPad, and I think at the end of the day, for it still turning on and everything, I think it's pretty surprising. But again, my expectations were pretty low going into this specific device. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. And I will probably end up ending it there. I don't think I'm going to go ahead and say whether this thing is still worth it or not, because in all honesty, I think the iPad 1 is completely worth it only as a collector's item. If you can pick up some of these iPads, at least one of them, for a cheap price, or a cheaper price compared to the market, and if you can see that, wow, this thing is actually going to go up in value soon, or you can hold it out for a couple of years, that's really the only reason I would recommend it. For any other reason, I would not recommend buying this iPad at all. If you're planning on using it, absolutely no way. I would not feel comfortable recommending this type of iPad to anybody. The lowest iPad I would recommend anybody to get is like an iPad 5th or 6th generation. Those are like the absolute lowest. Other than that, I would highly stay away from buying an iPad 1 for using it for anything else as a collector's item, unless you want to have it as like a showpiece or something like that, because like I said before, this thing feels like a premium, like $1,000 iPad. So I'll be honest, it still feels like that, even though it's not at all. It still gives me that impression, which I think is a humongous asset for it. But do keep in mind, it's not going to give you any type of crazy performance. I will be surprised if anybody even leaves comments on this video saying that they used it or whatever. I will surely be shocked. But at the end of the day, I think it's a great collector's item, and that's really the only reason why I would recommend anybody buying an iPad 1 in 2021. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly, everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.